And I get it. When things are tough, when you feel like you're beat down, you can't fake your way through being positive and trying to pretend that you feel a different way than you actually feel. So here's the secret sauce, is that you have to feel the emotion. You have to feel whatever the authentic, real emotion is. And, in the personal growth world, there's this thing of like, don't be negative. Don't focus on negative emotions. Focus on positive emotions. And that's complete bullshit. And I'd like to offer here that there is no such thing as negative or positive emotions. There's just emotion. Welcome back to another episode of the Ignite the King podcast. I'm your host, Michael Diamond, and I am excited to share with you today some pretty powerful concepts around the warrior energy and it not being about the circumstance. And this is often something we'll come up with men that we work with where really rattled by things that happen in their life. And, whether it's losing a job or taking a financial hit or having a divorce or the economy or even the election, and feeling like your life is tantamount to what's going on in the external. And something we fundamentally teach in Ignite the King is it's never about the circumstance, no matter how extreme, no matter how devastating the news you get is. And what's going on in your life, it is truly never about the circumstance. It's the energy in which you bring to the circumstance, and it's how you're choosing to respond as opposed to react into the circumstance. And myself included, and I'm sure many of you men out there can relate, where you get news about something shitty happens in your life, and it's a quick downward spiral where all of a sudden everything in your life seems to suck. And whether, again, it's losing a job, losing a friendship or a partnership, or getting news that your wife is going to leave you, or what's going on in the economy, like I said, or the election even, which is obviously a very hot topic right now. Lots of people really happy, lots of people really upset, and thinking that their life is going to change in a fundamental way really isn't true. And what you perceive as what's going on is going to dictate the energy available to you in that situation. And oftentimes, as the case may be, especially things around business, where the things you thought were the biggest challenges wind up being the biggest gifts. And the only thing that will help you get to that gift is the energy in which you bring to that situation. So again, if you think everything sucks and everything is shitty, well, guess what? No matter what shows up in your life, it's going to feel like everything sucks and everything is shitty, right? So you could have the same situation, but realize, wow, what's the gift in this? What is this trying to teach me? What is this really all about? How can I show up even better in this situation? Wow, looking at that future version of myself, looking back at this moment right now, realizing, wow, that had to happen in order for me to make the changes that were necessary. And sometimes you need that kick in the ass and put your ass in the wind for it to actually make a change. Often in our work, we'll say, do you want to get tickled by a feather, hit by a brick, or hit by a truck? And most men definitely wait to get either hit by a brick or a truck, which fucking hurts and can kill you. When it comes to our health, when it comes to our finances, when it comes to our relationship, when it comes to really the mission you're serving in your life, how bad do things have to get? So again, life is going to happen. Change is inevitable. The classic idiom is the only constant is change. And I am definitely finding in my life recently that that is the case. And it's how I, quote unquote, roll with the punches, evolve, see what this is teaching me, the energy of which I bring. And don't get me wrong, when circumstances come up, I've definitely had the experience where energy drops. I get self-loathing. I get whiny. I get bitchy. I get complaining. All of the things what really can keep me in that low energy state. Now, I want to make it clear, it's important to feel the feelings, feel the feels, and be with the range and the fullness of the emotion that any circumstance brings up. But emotion, as we said many times, is energy in motion. It's meant to emotion is meant to radically shift your physiology so that you can make change, to ready your body, ready your mind, ready your physiology for change. And then we move with that thing. But if we stay stuck in the emotion and have that emotion repeat over and over again, then it becomes more about the story you're telling yourself than the actual feeling. If you were actually just to feel the feelings, you would be able to move through it, get beyond it, see more clearly, and then make better decisions based on that new information that happens. And because of so many factors of maybe our past experiences around something, our inability to access emotion, or life circumstances that seem to pile up and produce the same message to you, it's easy to get stuck. And when we get stuck, we get in that loop where we think, well, woe is me, this sucks. And then we start pointing the finger out at others and saying it's all because of his fault. It's all because of her fault. It's all because of the economy. It's all because of the government, and pointing that finger out, where ultimately that finger needs to point back in. And when that finger points back in, we can look at ourselves and take a real inventory and self-reflection of like, what in me is stuck? What in me is not moving? What in me is not changing? And then when we ask that and we have a real conversation with ourselves and take full ownership of anything that's happening, then we can finally fully be with the energy. And once you can fully be with what's going on, what happens is it starts to move. Just like if you've been withholding something or holding something in or not sharing or not being truthful with something in your life, when you finally own up to it, have accountability, have integrity, be vulnerable, transparent, share about it, it moves the energy. How many of you men out there have had the experience where maybe with your loved one, where there's something you've been withholding, something you hadn't been sharing about, it's fucking eating you up inside, and it's starting to manifest physically in your body, where you get finally to the point in the awareness where it's like, I need to fucking say something, because not saying something is far worse than actually just coming out with it. And when you come out with it, it literally moves the energy. And when you finally feel that relief, then the thing that we feared the most typically doesn't happen. My father always said to me, things are never as good as bad as they seem. And if you can just be with what's going on and share from that vulnerable place, the energy can start to move, things can start to open up, the people, places, timing, and all of the things necessary to make actual change in your life will start to manifest, will start to show up, because the energy isn't stifled. And I know we get into energy a lot on this podcast, and it's important because energy precedes the form. The energy from which you create guides and determines your creation. And I'll say that again. The energy from which you create guides and determines your creation. If everything is fucking ho-hum, everything sucks, dragging your feet, meh, well, don't be surprised that your experience of life exactly mirrors that energy state. And I get it. When things are tough, when you feel like you're beat down, you can't fake your way through being positive and trying to pretend that you feel a different way than you actually feel. So here's the secret sauce, is that you have to feel the emotion. You have to feel whatever the authentic, real emotion is. And, in the personal growth world, there's this thing of like, don't be negative. Don't focus on negative emotions. Focus on positive emotions. And that's complete bullshit. And I'd like to offer here that there is no such thing as negative or positive emotions. There's just emotion. So whether it's happy, glad, sad, anger, mad, fear, whatever the feeling is, if that's what's coming up, fully feel it. And there's different types of work, energy work, breath work you can do to get into that energy. And it needs to be something that is physiology based, body based, somatic based. And in our work, we teach what's called somatorespiratory integration, SRI, which was developed by Dr. Donald Epstein, who is the founder and developer of network spinal analysis, which I practiced for many years in California, had 2 wellness practices. And the hands-on breath work was so powerful because it represented the different consciousness states that we go through in the healing process. And when you can recognize from a clear place, this is where I'm at. I may not love where I'm at. I may not love this feeling or experience, but if I could just fully be with it, that's enough to start to move the energy. And once the energy starts to move, guess what? More energy becomes available. And guess what happens after that? As more energy becomes available, then you're able to access more of it. And then it starts to build a momentum. And then you can start to harness that, focus it, direct it into something that's actually going to produce measurable change. And that's what this whole personal growth game is about. It's about measurable change. So if it's your finances, if it's your relationship, if it's your business, whatever it is in your life, your children and how you interact with them, if you're constantly having the same talks, the same conversations, the same thoughts, the same feelings around the situation that you don't love or aren't moving, guess what? You're fucking stuck. And if you're stuck, you need to amplify that for a moment. You need to go fully into the feeling of feeling stuck. Sometimes I feel like this is never going to change. Sometimes I feel like it's going to be this way forever. Sometimes I feel like I have to do it all by myself. Sometimes I feel like the world is against me. Whatever the story or the statement is that you're telling yourself, then you need to get fully with that experience. And it may suck for a little while. It may not feel good, but it's absolutely necessary to move the energy. Again, energy precedes the form. So what we experience in our everyday life is the three-dimensional world, the 3D. But we don't necessarily live fully in the three-dimensional world. We live in the five-dimensional world, the 5D. And this is, getting into more quantum physics, metaphysics. And I'm not going to get into the details of that on this episode, but just know that there is a whole host of energetics around you, working with you and around you all the time that is being influenced by your energy state. There's even things like Carillion photography where you can measure people's auras and you can see, for example, when people are eating fast food and low energy, ultra processed foods, that the field around their body actually shrinks. Where when they're eating healthy, vibrant, alive, fresh foods, you can literally see in these photographs the field expanding. And we know now that what we put in is a representative of what we get out. The classic idiom of garbage in, garbage out. So what are you surrounding yourself? Are you scrolling on social media for hours a day, intaking constant fear porn and what's going on in the world and how things are terrible? Well, and then you have the experience in your life where everything is terrible, or the perception that everything is terrible and breaking down. Well, no fucking surprise there. So what are you putting into the system? And what are, not only in your own system, but what are you putting into the system in your life? What energy are you adding into the field? Again, my mentor, Donnie Epstein, would say, you are constantly being rewarded or punished for the amount of energy you're adding or taking away from the field. You are constantly being rewarded or punished for the amount of energy that you're either adding to or taking away from the field. So we must take stock as men, as the pillars and leaders of our families, our businesses, our communities, our neighborhoods. What is the energy we're putting out there? And are you taking on others' energy? And that's a real thing. Again, if you're constantly bombarded by social media or negativity around you, or just allowing yourself to put up with other people's stuff, then you will see that your energy levels are just going to plummet. And then nothing's available. And you're going to live this ho-hum, bullshit, Groundhog's Day experience where you're just going through the motions. And then something in your life is going to happen to wake you the fuck up. And I've experienced this many times in my life where if I'm going along with the same mindset and the same consciousness for too long, life will have a very interesting way of giving me a new experience or a new circumstance to say, hey, are you paying attention yet? And the more I ignore those signals, the more I don't get the deeper meaning of the circumstance, the more that I am going to pay for it later. And the more I listen to those things and the more I am in tune with the subtle energetics of life and the subtle messages, not so subtle messages I get, the easier it is for me to pivot and to make change. And this is, goes into innovation and adaptability and entrepreneurship. And you look at the innovators out there in the world, the high-level entrepreneurs, leaders who are actually making massive changes in the world. What is it? They're tapped into what people need before they know they even need it. They're listening to the marketplace. They are tuned into what the next trend is and getting on the front end of that trend. And that is so important in business, of course, and it's so important in your life. If you get to the point in your relationship where your wife is having to spell it out for you of what you've been doing or not doing, then you're past that point. I could tell at this point in my life, if my wife is breathing a certain way or the breath is coming out of the side of her mouth, I know something is up. I don't need her to tell me that. Now, what I do with it, that's another story. And that's something I've had to learn being in relationship for so long with her, is being okay addressing that energy, not backing down from that tough conversation. And I've had some experiences recently where I've had to take my power back, and not just in relationship, but in business, where I had to draw that line in the sand and say, enough of this. Like, I will not accept this level of talk anymore. I will not accept this kind of behavior anymore. And that's a tough thing to do in any kind of relationship, especially in business, especially in our intimate relationship, because that can feel like a confrontation and that can feel like a battle. But again, energy precedes the form. So what energy are you bringing to the situation? Are you genuinely wanting to know what's going on, or you're just wanting to move on and deal with it and not have to actually get underneath what's going on? And most men will just, especially in their relationship, will just put it up with it. And what will happen is that resentment, that energy will fester, it'll build up, and often will ultimately lead to a blowout. And those blowouts can cause relationships to break up, can cause families to break up, when in fact, if we just address the energy underneath in ourselves and didn't allow it to get to that, then how we show up in those conversations, how we show up in those situations will be very different. So just to repeat here, the energy precedes the form. How many of you men out there are actually taking the time to work with yourself, to do breath work, to do meditation, to do nervous system work, to do self-reflection, to go on a men's weekend or a transformational weekend, to buy and actually use a course online, or do something, or read a book where you're actually taking time to self-reflect, like, this is what's going on with me. Okay, look at a situation in your life where there's a challenging circumstance, and it's like, what is this trying to teach me right now? What is the message that this situation is showing me? And how is it growing me? So what is it showing me, and how is it growing me? Who am I becoming in this process? Because anytime you set a goal or you have something you want to achieve, it's not about the goal. It's not about the thing. It's who you become in the process. And this is where your character gets revealed. This is where your integrity gets revealed. This is where accountability gets revealed. And these are core pillars of the warrior energy. And in our group, we have been steeping in the warrior energy. And when you create a pristine environment where integrity, accountability, transparency, vulnerability are at the top, then anything that isn't congruent with that is going to show up. Anything that can't live there anymore is become really apparent, because you're not blind to it anymore. You're actually taking self-accountability. You're actually looking at your life and saying, how can I improve here? What do I need to see here? What is this really about for me? What do I need to be with? And this can be scary, because that thing that you've been avoiding for so long really has gotten built up to be such a big thing that when you actually finally look at it, you actually finally address it, you finally get that health diagnosis, or finally look at the bank account, or finally deal with that conversation you have to deal with, you will realize that the big boogeyman you thought was in the closet was really just like a little gerbil with a shadow. And when you face it, you realize that wasn't so bad. I mean, how many times you had the experience where maybe you were tentative about having a conversation and making that phone call, and you finally do, and you get off the phone and realize, man, that wasn't that big of a deal, and I feel so much better that I've actually addressed this energy in my life. And what comes of that, and then the things that open up. So, classically, they say whatever resists persists. So whatever you suppress, whatever you put down, whatever you're not allowing yourself to be with is just going to keep amplifying until something in your life is going to show up, say, you have to deal with this now. And this is classic, my healing practice for many years. I would see people where they finally were dealing with something, and then they weren't actually avoiding it anymore. And they were saying, okay, what do I got to be with here? What is that thing I've been afraid to find out, afraid to, feel, and now I can finally feel it. And when they do, they get on the other side of it. And when you get on the other side of it, new things start to open up. And when you look back at those moments in your life, you will see how perfectly planned each of those things were, even the hard things, especially the hard things. You will see that those things had to happen in the way that they happened. And unfortunately, you won't necessarily get that clarity until later, when you look back, and you will see that everything that happened that led up to those circumstances, that led up to those situations, had to happen exactly in the way that they did. And it was almost like the most perfectly crafted novel you've ever read. And anytime you've achieved anything great in your life, anytime you've ever walked through the fire and gotten to the other side, how you got there is very different most of the time, if not 100% of the time, different than how you thought it was going to be. And that's just fact. So look at anything in your life, look at anything you have in your life, and see all the things that had to happen, exactly how and when they happen for that thing to manifest in your life. And at the time, some of those things may seem like so bad, so detrimental, like the worst thing that ever happened. And I'm not saying bad things don't happen and challenging situations that happen, but it's who you become as a result of those challenging situations, of those hard things. You're either going to be burnt by the fire, or you're going to be made by the fire. And we as men access the warrior energy in its fullness. You welcome that challenge. You welcome that adversity. You welcome those trials, the tribulations, being forged in the fire to become the man that you know you need to become. It is only in my greatest challenges I can sit here and tell you that those things made me who I am. Nothing in life comes easy. Nothing in life is handed to you. You must face the challenges head on. And the more I've avoided those challenges, the more I avoided those hard conversations, the more I didn't deal with things when I needed to deal with them, the harder they became to deal with later, the more expensive they became to deal with later, and the more energy they took to deal with later. So I say all this to say, when shit comes up in your life, be real with it. Be with the emotion of it. What's the feeling? And as men, we were conditioned or deconditioned, as the case may be, to not feel our feelings, to look as feelings as weak. Emotion is your superpower. Being tapped in, being intuitive to what's going on within your body, in your relationships, in your family dynamics, in your community is a fucking superpower. We must peel off all the layers of that density and that shroud of bullshit and lies and masks that you've been wearing to protect yourself, to present yourself in a certain way that really isn't the true representation of who you are. So again, energy precedes the form. What are you doing to actually tune in, to tap in, to connect to what those feelings are, to what the emotion really is? And this is something that has to be developed. This isn't something you can just, oh, what am I feeling right now? But that is actually a really good question to ask yourself. What's the feeling? What's the experience? When we ask men to check in and to say, hey, so-and-so checking in, feeling, ... Because often men will get right into the story, right into the data, right into the perceptions of what's going on, with totally bypassing and avoiding the feeling of what's happening. So it's absolutely imperative, first and foremost, to tap into the feeling, then the story, then the data, then the perceptions, then the meaning, because you can't get into the truth of what's really going on unless you could actually be with the realness and the rawness of the emotion. And most men will bypass that emotion, will suppress that emotion, will have a story about the emotion. Emotion could be like a four-letter word, something they don't want to feel, don't want to experience, when in fact, as a man, as an awakened man, emotion is your superpower. And again, it's not to sit in the emotion and wallow in the emotion. No, emotion is emotion, energy in motion. Physiologically, emotion is only meant to be felt for seconds to maybe a minute or two. Anything longer than that is the story that you're telling yourself about the emotion. Think about it. If I asked you to express anger, really to express anger in its fullest sense, and you tried to do that from 2 minutes straight without stopping, you would be completely exhausted. And you probably couldn't even sustain that for a full 2 minutes. But yet, how many of you are walking around feeling a sense of low-grade anger all the time? There's no such thing as low-grade anger. It's just suppressed anger that pops up in places and on people. You talk about road rage. You talk about people flipping out or having emotional reactions to things that just don't seem that intense. Why? Because they haven't fully accessed the feeling, the emotion, and it's been sitting under the surface. And then someone says or does something that activates it and makes it just blow up. So it is so important as an awakened man to have practices, to have time, to give energy to what you're feeling, because that is where your intuition, that is where your connection to the energetics comes in. Once you do that, then it's raw and real of what's going on. Then what starts to happen is the knowing, the connection start to pop. And then people, places, things, circumstances start to shift and change and show up for you because you move the energy. If you aren't willing to tap into that, you aren't willing to actually feel what's going on, then it's just going to sit there and it's going to fester and it's going to build and resentment's going to build. And that's going to color every one of your experiences from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. So as a practice, it is important to start to build somatic awareness, to build awareness with your body, to take inventory, to check in, to see, how am I feeling today? Again, that's why in our group in Ignite the King, when men check in, it's, I'm checking in, feeling ... stating the actual words of the feelings. And as we've talked about many times on this podcast, the words you use and the words you choose are absolutely imperative to the experience you're going to have. So it's a real gut check to see, like, what is the story I'm telling myself or telling the world every single day? And am I just reacting to the circumstances of what's going on in the world and allowing that to color my experience and affect my energy state and my energy levels? And how often do I let that go on for days or weeks or months or even years, where finally something in life is going to interrupt that enough where you're like, I need to do something different about this. I need to make this change. And part of this podcast is to wake that up in you before it results in your wife walking out the door or a business failing or your children not talking to you. Don't let things fester and build and get to the point where you're essentially giving up your wealth to regain your health. You know, most men will give up their health to gain their wealth and then realize they have to spend their wealth to regain their health, if they're lucky that they can even regain that. So when it comes to our body, our health, our physiology, when it comes to our relationships, intimacy, when it comes to our children and our family dynamic, don't wait until things have built up to a point where you're lucky if you're able to buy it back. So this is part of a huge part, especially at the beginning of going on this path of being an awakened man, is you have to develop this skill set and this connection and this embodiment to what's really going on in your life. So all this is to say that the energy precedes the form. The energy from which you create guides and determines your creation, which begs the question, what is the creation? What is your mission? What is your vision? What is it that you actually want to experience in life? Because most men, unfortunately, especially in our current culture, are living life by default, are just constantly reacting to what the circumstances in their life. How many of you just feel like you're putting out fires every single day? And then when that fire gets put out, here's the other fire. Here's the to-do list. Here's the task list, checking things off. Does that actually make you feel better? No, maybe for a moment you get a little dopamine hit of checking something off. But how many of you are living your life on purpose, where the mission is critical, where the vision is clear, where you're focused and on purpose, and no matter what shows up, no matter what challenges, no matter what thing that could potentially take you off, you see as just another threshold guardian of something that you need to cross over into to make that bigger positive change in your life. And these are different questions. These are higher level questions, but these are absolutely the questions that are necessary for you to live the life that you really want. And again, most men are living life by default, where they wake up again 5-10 years later and realize, what the fuck is going on in my life? This is the classic midlife crisis, where a man wakes up, 45, 50 years old, whatever the case may be. I mean, really, midlife crisis should be at 32 because of the life expectancy of men in America. But as the case may be, what is that thing that you're not going to wait until life smacks you in the face and says, make this fucking change? What kind of inventory are you taking? And that all maps back to, how are you allowing yourself to access the true and authentic emotion and feeling that's going on? Because what I can guarantee you is, if you can fully be with whatever the emotion is, whether you say they're positive or negative emotions, if you could just fully be with it and like for 1 minute, like let's say you're angry, good. Feel that anger. Let it course through your veins. Get that baseball bat out. Hit that heavy bag. And if you don't have a baseball bat and a heavy bag in your garage as a man, I highly recommend doing that, because if that doesn't get moved in a safe environment, it's going to get moved on somebody else. And unfortunately, it usually moves on the people we care about the most, your intimate partner, your family, someone at your work, or some unsuspecting stranger. And that can cause a lot of problems in your life. Think about crimes of passion, where men get so overwhelmed with feelings they don't know how to handle, and then they do something that basically lands them in jail, and then they live with regret. Was it really worth it? Was it really worth exploding on someone for living a life where now you're imprisoned? And that would obviously be a worst case scenario. So it's absolutely imperative, absolutely important for men, and you men out there that are living an awakened masculine embodiment and lifestyle, to fully access and be with the emotions. Because once you can do that, then it's never about the circumstance. It's never about the thing. It's about who you are and how you're showing up to that thing. It's not what happens, it's how you respond to it. We've heard this from every coach and personal growth group from the beginning of time. It's not what happens. It's who you are in the moment, who you showed up to be. So hope you enjoyed this straight download today. This is absolutely showing up in my life right now and my work that I'm doing, and wanted to share this because I know if I'm feeling it, many of you men are out there are feeling it right now. So take this in, work with the emotion, go to a program, read a book, listen to a tape, get into your body, use that information to access the energy that's going on. Hope this serves you well. Have a beautiful day, and like, share, subscribe this wide, and much appreciated for all the support. Aho.